And can you hear me all right? All I can see is Carrie and John now. So are we all right? Okay, good. This is great. I am excited to be here, Carrie. You were telling the truth. I am happy it was so fun just watching you all come on the call. It was just I don't know if I saw all your names, but I'm very pleased. If you're out there, I probably saw you, and I was very pleased to see you join us in here. Yes, this is the 150th anniversary observance of what was probably the most traumatic event in South Berwick, Maine of the 1800s. And as we start, I would like to send a word of thanks to the many South Berwick residents and Historical Society members who have contributed to my knowledge and whose information is contained in the Counting House archives. This is really what we're going to hear is from everybody who's contributed. Also to Rick Becker for many photos appearing on his Facebook page, Old Time South Berwick, and to John Dimas, Nicole St. Pierre, and Carrie Quater for their help in preparation. Carrie also mentioned the video, Tim Benoit's video, The Night South Berwick Burned, is viewable on YouTube with full animation and sound. So if you like what we hear tonight and want to go deeper with more theatrics, check out Tim's video. In our year of disasters in the United States, a small town fire is minor by comparison, certainly to the infernos now blazing out west. But in the summer of 1870, when South Berwick's total population was less than 2,600 people, those citizens would have felt many of the emotions familiar to Americans today. To set the context of this fire, let's take a quick look at South Berwick Village. Dialing back of what seems like a long time ago to the beginning of this year, South Berwick was named one of the best places to live in Maine by Down East magazine. And South Berwick's recent inclusion there was attributed in part to the historic village, where 100 structures are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And there's the business block, is one of those so recognized. So how does South Berwick come to be located there? Why is this crazy intersection located in this part of Maine? It's not in the center of South Berwick. It's not in the center of the state. Why is it there? So let's just take a second to see how that came to be. In the 1600s, the first settlers arriving from Europe were really dependent on the rivers for transportation. And so this is a little snippet from a 1600s map. Indicating how people really were clustering their homes along the Piscataqua and up at the top of the map, the Nowitchuwannock River that we today call the Salmon Falls River. As time went on, roads intersected with the river system, and South Berwick was well positioned. For a couple of centuries, there were no bridges down in Portsmouth because of the depth and swiftness of the currents there. So the main land route from the United States, in the early United States, from Massachusetts through New Hampshire and on into Maine, was through South Berwick. If you could see how this red road has to swing around Great Bay, and the bridge at South Berwick, near where the counting house is today, was the place that road travel could cross to come in. So zooming in a little closer, this little map shows that road coming in from New Hampshire. In purple, splashed along here, shows where the population centers of the community were in the 1600s, in the very early decades, clustered around the rivers and the falls where sawmills were located. But as time went on, the population started to gravitate to this flat area known as the plain. I don't think anyone calls it that today, but it was commonly called the plain at that time, just below Butler's Hill. In 1805, this map is an excerpt from a hand-drawn 1805 map, and you'll see the configuration of the roads of Main Street and Portland Street that we still have today. At the top, there's that intersection of Main with Portland Street branching off to the right. And then at the bottom of this map, the road coming in from New Hampshire and via past where the counting house is today. At that time, there were other buildings in this scene in 1805, but This map shows two brothers, John and Edmund Haggins, whose homes were situated next to certain intersections on Main Street, and those houses are still there today. In 1774, John Haggins built what we know as the Sarah Orne Jewett House at the corner, and his brother Edmund built the house at the intersection of Main and Academy Street. So that's very cool that we still have these. In the 1820s, Theodore F. Jewett, a sea captain, succeeded John Haggins in that house, and the name Jewett attached to the house that we still have today. He had a little store across the street that's still a business in downtown South Berwick. And the map in the background of this picture, you could see, the map dates from 1835 approximately, but you can see that that configuration of the Jewett House and then some houses across the street. As the 1800s drew on, the village started to fill in all around that intersection. And I keep flipping the orientation of the map. I hope you can follow the directions here. I'll get my cursor going. Here's the Jewett House in the middle. And across the street in blue is that Jewett store. The Oddfellows block was built in 1845, and next to it is a store built even earlier than that, around 1800, not much longer, almost as old as the Jewett House. The other thing that contributed to the growth of the downtown was rail transportation, and South Berwick used to have a rail line that ran right behind the downtown, from carrying trains from central New Hampshire down towards Portsmouth and on to Boston. So we have quite a bit of knowledge about what was going on at those houses that I've just mentioned, but what was going on across the street, because that is where the scene of our fire is going to take place. This is that map from about 1835 that I showed you a piece of a minute ago. The dwelling house in the upper right-hand corner is the Jewett House. Here's the Oddfellows block with Nason and Murphy having businesses down below. Theodore Jewett's house is across the street. And then over here and to the left, the Parks store we still have today. That's where the Asia Chinese restaurant is. But these buildings here, we don't know what they look like. Sadly, there are no photographs that we know of that have remained from that time. We do have, fortunately, some South Berwick residents' eyewitness reports. And there was a resident named Edward Pike who was born in 1841. And he filled us in. He said that Yetton's block was this brick store here, an imposing double two-story brick building with a central hall on the second story. Now, we don't have any pictures, as I said, but here I've stolen the picture on the left is from the internet. It's a museum in Oregon, and another old building probably from the same vintage as ours. And the picture on the right was a South Berwick building, which we no longer have, and it was at a different location. It was near where Central School is today. So the buildings in that place across from the Oddfellows block, across from the Jewett House, the mystery buildings probably look something like this. These are South Berwick buildings that are all of them are gone, but this little section of the street was farther south. But this is probably how it kind of looked in that area. So now we can turn to our residents who are giving us some description of what was there. One of the most memorable stores was a jewelry and clock shop in one of those stores that was right in that place, and it was owned by Hollis Witt. Mary Jewett, another resident, she was Sarah Orne Jewett's sister. She later described those curious persons, the Witts, who will never be quite forgotten by those who knew them and can call to mind their peculiarities. The stuffy little shop with its noisy clacking of clocks, and the queer little figure of its owner, who rarely was seen outside its four walls, and then went shrinking along, muffled to his eyes, even in a warm summer day. And the wife, Mrs. Witt, who was far more than his other half, with her piercing black eyes, sharp tongue, and really kind heart. The Old Berwick Historical Society's collection is fortunate to have a little sample from his from the clock store. I'm sorry, I'm having to make an adjustment here so I can see what I'm doing. So next to the clock shop, there was a barber shop and a harness maker. Edward Pike, the South Berwick resident, tells us about Noah's Pike harness shop, and part of that building, there was a man named Ambude, a barber, said to be a Spaniard, who used to sit on the front steps and play a guitar in the evening. And we don't know much about this character. I really wish we did. He might have been African American. Was he a former slave brought to Maine? Would he come aboard one of Captain Jewett's ships? We just know nothing at all. And after this period, his fate is unknown. We just don't know what became of him. Farther along Main Street was a wooden building containing a tin store owned by Joseph P. Davis, who manufactured products. Here's a funnel and a biscuit cutter, and our museum is proud to own these items today in our collection. So these are some examples of the businesses that we know that were along that section. And the feeling of the downtown was probably pretty, this is a later picture, but it was probably looked pretty much like we see here today. Horse-drawn wagons and carriages, dirt-paved streets, and animals. Farmers occasionally driving their cattle through town and letting them stop for a drink at the watering trough that was located in the busiest spot in York County today. So this is where the fire began, about midnight on July 25, a Monday. And on the morning of July 26, South Berwick resident Rebecca Young said later, the fire had left nothing behind but coals and smoking debris in uncovered cellars. The scope, so this is a map from 1856, about 15 years before the fire, but shows some of the stores we've just been describing, some of the businesses. And I don't know if you can see that the area on the left is slightly shaded, and this is sort of the area that the fire ended up covering. I'm clicking away pictures of the waiting room because I don't want to see them. So Carrie, if I'm ruining anything, you could tell me not to do that anymore. So back to the fire. A Dover newspaper account said the Davis Tin Shop is where the fire began. Of course, Joseph Davis would have had heated materials to work his copper and tin. We don't know for sure, but there were about 12 buildings were impacted, destroyed, with a loss estimated at between $30,000 and $40,000, according to this newspaper article, and with insurance covering only part of it. The Dover newspaper said a railroad brakeman sounded the alarm as that train, ran through behind the town in the middle of the night. Residents had also been alerted by a neighbor, according to Rebecca Young. She said a man by the name of Mr. Knight had been awake with a sick child and saw flames flickering across the way and gave the alarm. She felt it was in or under or near the anteroom of this hall, this community of the central hall, where an entertainment had been going on during the evening, and that the fire began. So that wasn't, we don't know for sure whether there were smoking materials, but within a certain amount of time, people were shouting and clamoring, everybody get out, the buildings are on fire. Now, what did people have to fight a fire in 1870? Well, in those days, all residents would have had a pair of buckets in their home. Here are a pair that Ginny Alterio still has. She is a descendant of the Davis tinsmiths family, and this was the ancestor of Joseph Davis had these buckets in 1840, and Ginny has them today. They would have been kept full of water, and so in the middle of the night, people were waking up, hearing the panicking sounds, and grabbing their buckets and running. There was also a fire station in the downtown. One of those businesses right down, one of those buildings right there was the engine house, and so people would have run. They had to pull the wagon out These are pictures from later in the century, but probably the fire wagon looked somewhat the same. And in South Berwick Community Center, next to our fire department today, I hope you'll all stop and look, if you ever have, to see this wonderful South Berwick fire truck, which could have been the very one that was there and pressed into service in 1870. People would have to operate it by hand, and it was very primitive. They would also have to locate sources of water. The water sources, that town pump in the square where the cows were, there were private wells scattered about the local residents, and there were two little brooks. One, the Driscoll Brook, that's near Cummings Mill, and then behind South Berwick Town Hall today, I don't know if you've ever noticed, back of the parking lot, there is a little creek called Parks Brook. But the end of July, these probably didn't have much water in them, and they were a ways off from the fire itself. The Dover newspaper claimed the Dover Fire Department put the fire out. Someone must have had to saddle up a horse at midnight and go riding all the way to Dover in order for that Dover fire truck to get there. And their fire truck would have been horse-drawn, and it would look exactly like the ones in that we had. And there's a picture, the Courier and Ives picture that John found for me, showing a fire scene, which must have been pretty much like what we saw here. Here's the fire truck, and the fire. So the fire. This is a picture from later in the century, and it's a calmer posed photograph. But what would have happened in the middle of the night? The fire seemed to have gone on for some hours as people tried to slow it down, and then the wind drove it on. One of the episodes that happened was that a small boy fell into one of the uncovered wells, so the fire department had to pull him out. Everybody was trying to help. It was pretty chaotic. Rebecca Young said, one of our dear friends, hearing that the firemen were in need of some refreshment, in her sympathy and excitement, carried out to them a large roast beef and passed it around. So people were doing their best. But the fire engine did itself burn down. We're told by Edward Pike that it was made of brick, and it still was impacted by the blaze. The new fire station, incidentally, that was built to replace the destroyed engine house is the one that's still on Portland Street. If you recognize that building at the lower right, it's right next to the Portland Street car repairs. So the fire finally was stopped, and here's where it was stopped at last. And I haven't encountered a description of how many hours it went on, but it was for much of the night. This is a picture I took this year, standing right next to South Berwick Pharmacies here on the left. There's this little alleyway, and back here is this little alleyway, curves around to the left and runs behind the business block today. It's known as Scott's Court. And here on the right is the Civil Consultants Building. And these two wooden buildings, so the building right here is this fire station that was burning, and then there are two wooden buildings right here, both of them very old, and it's fortunate we have them today. Scott House was built in 1825, and the building that Civil Consultants is now in is built right around the same time, and they just by a hair's breadth escaped destruction that night. Both of these wooden buildings, eyewitnesses tell us, were saved by wet blankets dipped in rain barrels and placed on the roofs and walls by people's heroic efforts. Here's a picture from a couple of decades later, looking back at the scene, and there's that beautiful Masonic Hall where Civil Consultants now is. They just barely made it. And then, of course, all the wooden buildings over here on the other side of the street, they didn't burn either. And here's one that was also saved by blankets and carpets thrown by residents and occupants of the buildings, the Jewett House. This picture I threw in just to show the relationship of the two sides of the street. The Jewett House garden back there that we still have today, we still enjoy that today. It shows that played a role in the fire, in that the people who were whose buildings were affected. Fortunately, there were no fatalities. There were even no injuries that I've been able to discover. But people wanted to get their possessions out of the buildings. And so they were running in and out all night long. And a lot of them were dumping their possessions and the inventory of the stores into this garden across at the Jewett House. In the building we know of Civil Consultants, the old Masonic temple, was occupied by a Mr. Morrison, who had a cow and a pig. He had a cow and a family of pigs, and he in his house or in his building, and he brought them over to that garden and tied them up. There was a tailor, one of the businesses there next to the clock shop and the barber and everybody else, and he was running across the street all night long carrying coats and vests. Later, there was a story of a thief who helped himself to the clothes, putting on layer after layer, Rebecca Young said, until he had swollen all out of due proportion. Mrs. Witt, I believe Mr. Witt had died before the fire. And Mrs. Witt, by that time, was a widow, still trying to run the building, and she lost everything. And it was very sad. She lost her building, she lost her inventory. This little receipt from the 1872, it's turned up in our archives at the counting house, shows her paying rent to another family that was downtown a year later. And Rebecca Young said, it was a night of fear, even of terror, and of excitement and suspense, and to many a time of sorrow and discouragement. But the event ushered in a new era with a new landmark structure, more modern, as Rebecca said, more modern, more commodious and convenient, and in every way better adapted to their desired purpose. And we've got these two maps, the 1856 and 1872 over on the right, and we will see who will be occupying these buildings. Here is this magnificent new structure. The town really pulled together, and the building, this business block was up within a year or two. Let's take a moment to see what they actually built. And I hope that some of you will sign up for John's walk, because he and I were walking around a few days ago and looking at this, and we tend to take this building for granted. One of the things that you tend to assume is that, it's just a block, it's a block. But this isn't a block like we would build today. This is not a mini mall that would go up this year. And it's nothing we would ever be able to build today. The architecture is different all along the street. And I'm just going to talk for a second, going from left to right, from the south end to the north end. The top of the building, the slate is this beautiful beaver tail roof slate among what used to be 8 dormers. Now there are now 6 dormers left down there. And then it switches, and the next section of buildings moving towards the right is this hall. And we're going to talk some more about that, but it's got completely different architecture. And then moving to the right, you've got different kinds of windows, some with keystones and some without. You've got wood soffits running along the street, and some of them are ornamented. We've got patterned masonry. And so it's really cool. It's a really cool little complex, and I hope you will all look in the future and appreciate it. And we owe it to this man here down below, Isaac P. Fall. This gentleman lived on Academy Street. His beautiful brick house is still there. You can't miss it, towards the end of the street by Main Street. And he, and sure others, but he was the brick mason largely responsible for this building to go up. So by 1872, there was an atlas showing a whole array, showing our new block with all these business slots, places in here. And fortunately, we can look to this to see what the businesses were. From the right to the left, from the north to the south, we're going to take a quick survey. From the South Berwick pharmacy location we know today, Whitehead the tailor, the guy who put all his jackets in the garden at Jewett House, his business survived, and he was in there. Actually, his business and his son's business lasted until the 20th century. And he started out right here at the end of the building, and there was a printing office at the very end. Charles Whitehead had a little ad in a local paper. South Berwick had a little paper at that time, and the OBHS is lucky to have a button from one of his vests in our collection. Moving to the left, Brookings Photography. This photographer had a studio in Rollinsford, and he was located in 1872, apparently right where the Thistle Pig and Grain restaurant location is in the business block today. Then there were several other stores that we know of through their ads in the paper. A fancy goods shop, WI here stood for West Indies, so they were still bringing rum in and who knows what from the West Indies. There was the Union Store. The first consumers cooperative in the United States had a chapter in South Berwick in the new business block. And bootmaker Charles Merrill had been burned out in the fire, but he reopened in another one of those storefronts. And the tinsmiths. Joseph P. Davis, we'll never know if you started the fire, but you were back in business in 1872, making lamps, fixtures, and people needed it. There was no plastic. They needed all that stuff, and so he thrived for a while. This was the McIntyre hardware store, probably maybe where Mark Lawrence's law office is. The doors are not exactly like they were. Look at this big elaborate door in this wonderful photograph we have. The McIntyres also had, one branch of the family had a sawmill, and were making furniture on what we would call Lower Main Street, where the little creek runs under there today. And the McIntyre Funeral Parlor today, that we still have that business in town, it gets its name from this McIntyre family. The Old Berwick Historical Society is very lucky to have a nice tool collection from the McIntyre hardware shop. And then moving farther to the end of the building, we had a drugstore. The Hanson brothers were in the very leftmost place, we think, and upstairs was the Masonic Hall on the 3rd floor, which doesn't exist anymore, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go back to the hall. One of the first things that happened after, well, first let me just recap. Back in the old building, we heard the references to the Central Hall. It was a beloved feature of one of the old buildings that was demolished. And they called it a Central Hall. We might call it a community center today. Mary Jewett said it provided a theater, opera house, lecture, and ballroom. And one of the first things the community leaders did after the fire was to form an organization to create a new Citizens Hall. They were history-minded folks there in 1870, and they called it the Newitchawannock Hall Association, a Native American name of the river. They wanted to reflect their long history, as we do ourselves. And the group was directed, at least for a time, by attorney Abner Oakes. When the new South Berwick business block opened in 1871, it included a 2nd floor hall, and it's still there. These pictures were recent pictures. If you stand across the street, and please, you really owe it to yourselves to do this, right across from the crosswalk, and look across, you see this symmetrical building with, on the 2nd floor, these triple pairs of double windows and the word hall over there. And you've walked by it 1,000 times and you've never noticed the word hall, but it was there. And up there, of course, we call it the Wadley Gardens Ballroom today. And the Old Berwick Historical Society has had the history games there most recently. Here's the McIntyre Doors, Sash, and Blinds Company billing the Newitchawannock Hall Association for their work on the new facility. So what did they do up there? Well, they had fun. In 1874, there was a performance of sacred hymns, and I don't know if it was humorous or what, but it was tunes thought to have been popular from a century before. In the 1880s, the Alumni Association of Berwick Academy met in the hall. By the 1890s, this was on display. So what was the wonderful clock of Strasbourg? Well, in Strasbourg, France, there have been wonderful mechanical clocks since the 1300s. And one like this from 1843, like this picture shows here, still exists in the cathedral. And according to Wikipedia, contains a perpetual calendar, a planetary dial, and at each noon there is a procession of 18-inch figures of Christ and the apostles, while a life-size rooster crows. Well, in 1887, a 25-year-old Australian watchmaker named Richard Smith decided to build a model of this wonderful clock and brought it to South Berwick. He apparently, he apparently toured the world with this thing, and he brought it to South Berwick one time, and everybody went up to into the what-you-want-to-call to see it. If you go to Sydney, Australia, you can still see it today in a museum there. No greater celebrities, however, did we have than circus performer Charles Sherwood Stratton, better known as General Tom Thumb. Born in 1838, as a boy, he was taught singing, dancing, and acting by circus owner Phineas T. Barnum, who happened to be a distant relative. Standing only 2 feet 11 inches tall, Charles was a talented actor and became an international celebrity. In 1863, he married Lavinia Warren, also a little person and a performer. And Warren Spencer, I don't know if he's here today, but Warren went on Rick's Facebook page recently and blew us all away by informing us that Lavinia Warren was a descendant of the South Berwick Warren family. Warren Spencer wrote, Tom and Lavinia would come to South Berwick to see her cousin Charles V. Warren, my great-grandfather, in the late 1870s and 80s. And South Berwick residents would climb the stairs to hear Tom Thumb and Lavinia perform. Well, on to the 20th century, the Nowitjawanack had become the Strand Theater, and the silver screen was in downtown South Berwick. And these are ads from our local newspapers that we have in the collection in the counting house. By the end of World War II, the theater was known as the Park, and it even had a telephone. You could see a feature for 18, 35, or 50 cents. And this is how it looked outside during World War II era. And here is here's the entrance to the Park Theater. And here's our building that we could still see today with those wonderful windows. So who else was there in the 20th century? On the first floor, grocery store proprietor Joseph Maddox and his son Albert operated the Maddox store. And this is how it looked inside. Look at the inventory. Anything you could possibly desire. But another business was competing with them. Flynn's Market was among the most enduring businesses in South Berwick's history. It closed in 1998 after 95 years of operation by the Flynn Roberge family. And it opened at the far south end, probably near where the Early Bird is, or Mark's Law Office. I'm not sure where it was exactly. But here's another interior photo. In the 1920s, Flynn's moved to 279 Main, where many of us remember it fondly. Here's Daniel Raymond Flynn, once the mayor of South Berwick, and Dennis Roberge and Gloria Roberge. Another iconic business, of course, was Rideout's Hardware. Owner Ruel B. Rideout was born in 1874, and he opened his store on the corner of Butler Street and sold groceries. But then he moved to the business blocks and began specializing in hardware. His son, John Paul Rideout, was born in 1908 and operated the store throughout the mid-20th century and was succeeded by his assistant, William A. Bray. Bray's daughter, Cheryl Johnson, assumed ownership in 1991 and ran the store until it closed in 2007. The interesting and unique Carrara glass from the sign can still be seen as picture frames in Nature's Way Market. Well, the businesses were the center of life in South Berwick through the 20th century. But there were some problems that still beset the building. There were fires. In 1936, there was a fire on the top floor of the business block. And then in March 1950, there was a fire starting in the Park Theater. In 1977 and 78, saw 2 more serious fires. And then a year or two later, the top story of the building at the south end, where most of the fires had occurred, the Masonic Hall, simply collapsed and was never repaired. This is the section over the Early Bird Cafe at the far end of the building. So that's where some of the dormers and the slate roof that was that you still see on the building today, some of it was completely lost at that time. So what historic features are in peril today? Well, you kind of worried. I mean, it's a fragile, all buildings are fragile, all historic features are fragile, and architectural features are fragile. So on the left, you can see the third floor where the Masonic Hall is now gone. Here are the remaining dormers, and here's this beaver tail roof slate. So that's very nice. But the woodwork up there, the soffits and gutters, it takes a lot of maintenance. And well, I just worry about it. I'll just leave it there. The building has been woven into the life of our community for 150 years. This wonderful picture shows the parades that were frequent in our town, and the business block was always a backdrop. Here's a picture from early on. I think the roads weren't paved yet, maybe. And look at the hitching posts, the granite hitching posts, and the drinking animal thing there. It was great. Here's a parade from the Quamfigan Grange, which was an organization of farmers. Wonderful float. People love to dress up and bring back the old-fashioned buggies and run them by the business block for everyone to take their picture. This photo, the building was made into a popular postcard, and we've got this in the counting house. Here's another postcard from outside the Masonic Hall. This gentleman was blind. Charles H. Goodwin sold newspapers and had a newsstand there at the building next to the doorway to go into the building. This is a treasure. It's a stereo slide for 3D view. You would have a little gadget and you drop that down in there and you could just feel like you were right in the scene with that beautiful building and that horse and buggy. And here's a scene I would really like to be dropped into. Look at the huge wagon. I don't know if it's a stagecoach or a hay wagon coming through town. It's wonderful. As the 20th century opened, the trolley line appeared, which ran for 20 years, 1903 to 1923. Streetcars appeared hourly, running right past the block, transporting passengers between South Berwick and Dover, York, Kittery, and Portsmouth, connecting to other trolley lines all over the region. Here's a gentleman waiting for the trolley. Post office at that time was right in the wooden building next to it. And the parades were always a wonderful part of everybody's remembrances. This may be 1926. Thank you, John, for dating the Chevy in the foreground. Great old scene with the old cars. Still a horse or two in the picture. And I'm told that these guys with their bikes are still around. If anybody knows who they are, feel free to put it in the chat, or maybe we could talk about it at the end. Here's a great parade float. We don't do this anymore. We should. In November 1943, November being the anniversary of the armistice of World War I, the town came out to honor its soldiers, its veterans, and World War II soldiers. And three South Berwick soldiers are here in this picture: Donut Parent, James Doherty, and Albert Jalbert. And they just closed down the whole street. Look at this. Dignitaries were seated. Veteran families were honored. In the front row here at the left, this couple here, at the moment this picture was taken, their son was in a Japanese POW camp, and he died about 6 weeks after this picture was taken. One of 9 South Berwick men lost in World War II. And our building, our business block, witnessed it all. It's from Generations have marked milestones outside this building and inside. Here in Wadley Gardens Ballroom, the former Nowitchawannock Hall, Conrad and Nicole St. Pierre celebrated their marriage. Don't know what year. This building has stood as a witness, and here are some dear friends who have were celebrating Home for the Holidays, and it's one of its first years with their flags. Dana Spence and Dick Currier, fondly remembered. And our South Berwick Central School, one of their routes goes by the building. They visit the storefronts. They go upstairs in the hall, and it's a really wonderful part of their hike through history learning. Everyone loves this picture, but it's not just the trolley. It's the architecture. South Berwick has authentic historic architecture. So let's celebrate 150 years of the building that helps define our town. I hope you will. I've loved talking to you about this. I hope you'll sign up for John's tour for a deeper look. It's Saturday, October 24 at 10 a.m. And go on our website and you can get linked to Carrie, who will